to Real Time Recorded. We're back. I'm Dave Michaels, and with me is Zias Parabola. How are you, Zias?
Hey Dave, it's been a while since we've done one of these, so it's good to be back.
It's good to be back. We were going to start in April, but honestly, there just wasn't a lot of news in April. And honestly, there's not a lot of news now, but we're going to go ahead and start anyway, right, Zias?
Yeah, it's been a
Um,
little quiet since Enterprise Connect, I suppose.
um, we've both been traveling. We've both been to New York, but on different weeks. I was there this week with Polycom, and you were there last week. I think in almost the same building at a Cisco event. And so my event was the opening, a grand reopening of a Polycom or Poly executive showroom. I don't think they call it. They call it Executive Briefing Center or Executive Center. Um, and big physical showroom, multiple floors. They got the roof up there. We had a roof reception, um, and this is the first Poly event since the acquisition of HP. And I have to say, I did a post on this on NoJetter. I have to say, I'm feeling pretty good about the acquisition by HP. I think it was probably inevitable for a company like Poly, possibly even for Logitech, and possibly even for Neat, as they're dealing with Zoom and Microsoft, much bigger companies. But we'll see on the other two there. Dave Scholl, the CEO, was at the New York event. And the game with all these guys right now is supply chain dominoes. Zias, how did it go in at the Cisco Center?
Yeah, Cisco didn't have an event as so much as just a little tour with Rupam and I. Cisco, it's interesting. They redid their offices to be better aligned with hybrid work. Like, for instance, the old office was designed with the principle that 70% of your work would be individual and 30% would be collaborative. Well, they flipped that around and assumed only 30% would be individual and 70% would be collaborative. So there's much more meeting spaces. They had been, Cisco's been big into sustainability, so they had sustainability in mind where every light system, all the blinds and things like that were all on the IoT network. And so you could actually say, hey, WebEx, lower my blinds, it would automatically do it. And so Mark Miller, the guy who gave the tour, actually said that the IoT network is bigger than the IT network. And so it was a
Yeah.
pretty interesting showcase of how you could deploy collaborative technology and make the workspace work a lot better for the hybrid workforce. And so that I thought it was a pretty interesting use case. And as it turns out, they built it for their workforce, but they've been trucking customers through there to give them a sense of what they should be doing with their workspace. And that's driven some sales from them. So I guess they decided they'd like to do a little tour. By the way,
It's almost ironic, really, because we're talking about hybrid work, and more people working remotely, and both these companies are opening up these fancy offices in New York, but they're really more showrooms, and they're really more to show hybrid work.
yeah.
So it's yeah.
Well, I think the Cisco one's actually the workspace, though. That's where, if you work for Cisco New York, that's where you're going. They're not assuming that everyone's going to be in the office. That, I think the assumption is that you get 20-30% of the workforce at all time. Everything's built out with hot desking in mind, so you can actually book your meeting space online before you get there, or your desk in mind, and then show up, and your desk is your desk and stuff. So I think this is the transition from remote work to hybrid work, and it's good to see both those companies having a play there. And just on your point on HP Poly, I'm not fully convinced yet that acquisition works. This isn't if it was HPE, the enterprise half, I'd be more inclined to believe it believes. I do think there's nobody. HP is one of the best supply chain companies in the world, so I think Polycom certainly wasn't. And so I think from a Poly perspective, it helps them that way. I do think, though, that what HP sells and how they sells, it's PCs and printers, it's low margin business. Poly's a premium priced vendor, so we'll see how the two marry. I think there's a big cultural difference there as well. But clearly, I think Poly's better off being part of somebody else's portfolio than
Well,
standing alone.
HP has to make it work because both PCs and printers are kind of declining,
Yeah,
and they need a new growth opportunity. And riding Microsoft Teams coattails is a pretty decent strategy, particularly for a company like HP, which is basically, for the last 30 years, been figuring out a co-successful strategy with Microsoft. They've got the global distribution, and they've they're the Microsoft meeting rooms need a PC to make them work right, and so there's a lot of synergy there, and I think that's pretty good fit actually.
Yeah, also this week, Dave, Cisco did a contact center deep dive. It's actually why I was one of the reasons I was at the Poly event. I was curious to see how they've been doing. And it was an interesting deep dive for Cisco because this is an area, contact center as a service, where there's been a lot of questions. Are Cisco in? Are they not? They put a lot of investment into it. But still, a lot of the competitive thought out there is that Cisco really isn't on board, with CCAS. They've got the old BroadSoft business, which was more private cloud. They had the on-prem business. And so this was a case, the ability for Cisco to highlight what they've been doing. They gave us a lot of customer wins. They showed some growth and stuff. And so, it's a market that I think Cisco wants. They're in. I think they were certainly late to market, but I think a lot of the proof points and things they went through clearly indicated they're here to stay and they're leveraging the WebEx install base to get there.
Well, one of my favorite things about hybrid work is indeed some flexibility with async work. I couldn't attend the Cisco Contact Center Deep Dive live because I was at the Poly event, but I did watch it after the fact because Cisco is actually really good about recording stuff and capturing all the Slido notes and all the Q&A. They do a great job of that. So I was able to watch this deep dive, and I have to say it exceeded my expectations. I thought that I knew the Cisco Contact Center story pretty well, but it's really coming together pretty nicely.
Yeah, there's way more capability than people think, right? It's a solid business.
They shared the 13 channels now in their omni-channel story. It's like everybody says they have omni-channel, but not everybody says they have 13 channels. But they've shared with us under NDA a lot of the wins they've had, and there are a lot of familiar names there, and they're not just they're not just existing customers migrating. They're winning net new. I think a lot of that has to do with that acquisition of IMI Mobile. That's what gave them those 13 channels. That's what gives them a low-code story. That's what gives them a fairly decent CPaaS story. And I like the way Larissa talked about the way that she's leveraging the whole WebEx suite with the analytics and the smart audio and the AI tools. So there's the management portal, et cetera. So there's a lot coming together there and a little more momentum than I had anticipated. And I think a very important thing that they had done was they put up, I don't know if you caught it, Zeus, they had a slide that said the WebEx suite, and they listed the usual calling, messaging, meetings, et cetera. They had a similar slide at Enterprise Connect 22, but this one said contact center on it, and I think that was a omission last time. So I think that that was an important correction. So those are the two news stories we have. But let's take a look at quarterly results. There was actually quite a bit this week. We got we're not going to cover these all. We got Bandwidth.com, Vonage, Twilio, Logitech. I think there were even more. But common thread across all of these it's an unfortunate common thread, but the common thread is that these companies are still growing. They're growing double digits, but the market doesn't respond well. And I think we have a couple of theories about why that is the case. We're also, another common thread is enterprise sales. We're seeing bigger and bigger sales from all these companies. So before we get into specific numbers, did you want to say anything, Zeus?
Yeah, it's interesting because most of them have put up pretty good numbers. I think, some of them have shown that margins have been declining a little. I think the cost of just building the product's been going up. But from an investor standpoint, when I talk to investors, there's a lot of confusion out there as exactly what happens to the communications as a service segment. Most of them were bucketed in the work from home category, and now that we're going to hybrid work, that spooked a lot of them, thinking that the run these companies have had is over. And I think what investors a lot of times don't understand is that they're hybrid work companies. They're not work from home stocks, right? And so just because you have some workers going back to the office doesn't mean you don't need Zoom or RingCentral or Bandwidth or any of these companies anymore. In fact, you could argue you need them more. I think there's also a lot of questions as to, even though companies want people to go back to work, are they actually going to go back to work? Right? I don't know if you saw Apple employees released a letter to the CEO saying, "Don't make us come back to work. We think that's the worst thing you can do with the company." Right? So I think the question is what. So between that and then the macro going on right now, we've got inflation, we've got a war going on. I just think the market's been in a bit of a tailspin, and I don't know how good the numbers would have had to been for these companies to get the stocks to pop. But clearly the trend is upward, the continued upwardness for the companies, and that's a good thing for the whole segment.
It really is. It really is a pickle because you don't want to buy right now a company that's associated with work at home, but then, like you said, that letter to Apple, employees don't want to go back, and so what do you invest in? And the macroeconomics you're talking about, you hit the war, and I think you said inflation, but we still got this pandemic going on, and cases
Yeah.
are going up again in certain states, and now we're seeing interest rates going up, and I think the market's like, well, what do we invest in? I guess they've all decided Exxon's the answer, but it's a shame because look at some of these numbers. Let's dive into some of these. So Bandwidth.com, right? They announced 131 million in quarterly revenue. They were up 16% year over year. These are healthy numbers. That's a nice number, 16%.
Yeah.
Their messaging grew 35%. They raised full year guidance. They even have insiders like the CFO and a director buying more stock. They had some big wins with names like Genesis with their duet with Genesis. They had a big win with Five9 on what's claimed to be the largest hotel franchisor in the world. They had a number of really nice big wins, and so I look at these results and I see a very healthy company, and I know their stock has gone not responded the way they wanted to. I'll just say it that way. They've been hiring. We know Anthony Bartolo from Tata is over there, and I think he's going to be doing a lot of good things there. I'm feeling good about Bandwidth, but the market's not as excited as I am.
Yeah, well, the key is they raised full year guidance. They projected out more than what the street thought they would do, and yet the stock didn't respond really positively, which is very curious.
Audio Codes, kind of a company that's a little under the radar, in my opinion, because they've been around for a long time. As ES&I, we were covering them back when they were doing cards for PCs, so they have a hardware heritage, but they've really pivoted. They're riding the Microsoft and Zoom coattails like some other companies. They said they saw 50% growth and more than 50% growth in both Microsoft and Zoom. They reported 66.4 million. Up 12.9% in sales. They missed the bottom line, so they're in the penalty box. That's because of supply chain stuff. We're going to see the same with Logi. We saw the same with Logi. We're probably going to see the same with Poly. And the supply chain's a big problem right now. I would say that Audio Codes is going through a pretty interesting transformation from hardware to software to recurring subscription services. They've got a really interesting play around conversational AI. They're powering a lot of the leaders in the conversational AI in the AI space. Some really interesting like textbook type of pivots going on there. Great company, but they missed. So penalty.
Yeah. Well, in conversational AI, it's a good industry to go into. It's awfully crowded though. There's a lot of players in that space now. I know a lot of the companies use them, but it's boy, I haven't seen a market with this many vendors in a long time.
Vonage also reported a loss, but I don't know if anybody cares about what Vonage reports. What do you think, Zeus?
Nah, well, the problem is the acquisition of Ericsson's pending. So they can put up great numbers, bad numbers, and I
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, customers still care about Vonage, and I do think if you look at the numbers of the company is executing better. I think Alan Mazarek was kind of the visionary there, and he put together a nice company with a good CPaaS back end, and this is how they were supposed to be executed. Right, leveraging the CPaaS backend, leveraging the API business to be able to drive more enterprise sales, and that's what Rory Reid's put in place now. So they're really in a good place right now, and it's I'm curious to see what Ericsson does with them, and I just hope Ericsson lets Vonage be Vonage.
Yeah, there's actually a better story there than their numbers reveal because they were up 8% year over year consolidated.
Yes.
But if you look at some of the individual buckets, like VCP, Vonage Platform, that was up 16% year over year. Their API revenue was up 28% year over year, and their UCC revenue was up 7%. So that consumer business really dragged things down quite a bit. Twilio, direct competitor, at least in one part of Vonage's business, Twilio announced 48% year-over-year growth. Now, their stock did not respond like a 48% year-over-year growth. You got to pull back the covers a little bit. They separate organic revenue from acquisition revenue. Their organic revenue is 35%, though. But the problem was, well, I guess the problem was they lowered guidance. Is that right?
Yeah. Their guidance implied 27 to 29% organic growth, which is the first time it's dropped them under 30% organic growth in a long time. And in fact, management before stated that they didn't feel they'd ever hit. They wouldn't. They'd exceed 30% organic growth through 2024. And so that was I think that itself was a bit of a surprise. I do think, given the macro and given how rapidly they expanded, I kind of understand why that happened. I still think, if you believe in that CPaaS is what this industry transitions to, they are kind of the class of the industry. So, if you believe in that secular trend, then you should believe in Twilio. And this was just a blip on the radar.
They also announced they hired a former board member as its president of revenue. I'm never crazy about the hiring the former board members. That doesn't seem to work out well. But what is a president of revenue anyway? I've never heard that title before.
Well, that's it. It's making sure we're doing all the things we have to do to get revenue back up, I suppose. I will say, I do think they've almost over-rotated to the segment business. I think segment's a good business. Well, Dave, that was, I guess we started this off saying there wasn't a lot of stuff going on, but there was a lot of stuff going on. So we'll be back next week with week 19. We've got a few companies announcing earnings next week, and I'm sure, as always, we'll likely have some news. So see you next week.
Until then.